There we have it. We are in, and welcome to this week's live stream on reviewing the performance reviews. So a massive thank you if you've joined the live stream this week. We've got people coming from very different platforms, from X, from I guess Instagram, Facebook, a few others, including, of course, our beloved LinkedIn, which is our primary focus, and a few different other web links as well. So depending on how you got here, thank you very much for being here. And maybe what we can do as we get into this is we can do a bit of a roll call. So just drop a message down in the chat. Where are you from? Either what country, what city, what organization. And if you are brave enough, if you're open to share this info, then maybe you could share in the open forum, maybe one of the challenges that you're facing with performance reviews. The whole idea of these live streams is, of course, for us as an organization to share with you what we found and what we're finding in our work, and we'll get into that. But also a big part of this is about how we help each other as peers. So you may spot something that you think, you know what, we've already done that, we've solved that, this is no longer an issue in our organization. Or there may be things that you think, you know, we really need help with a particular challenge, particular topic. Please just drop that into the chat and maybe others can share their wisdom with you. This is what this is all about. So again, a huge thank you to everyone who's joined in this live stream. This is a big one for us. The reason it's a big one is because we like to react to what the public say. And the public said that live streams should be focused, particularly this week, on what we call the performance review. And we gave three options. One is, what do CEOs want from the role of the manager? One was looking at a quite specific area of looking at coaching. And then the other one was looking at performance reviews. So we chose this one, performance reviews, for a reason, because the people said it. So who am I? Well, my name is Wayne Clark from the World Class Manager team. If this is the first time that you're connecting with us, then welcome. What we do is we focus on building line management capability, and we do that all around the world. So our team is based here in the UK. I'm here in sort of, I was going to say sunny London, but it's not. It's grey and rainy and cold. But I'm here in cold, grey, rainy, grey London on July the 3rd, which is odd. But anyway, and our team are based all over, from the US all the way through to Mongolia, the Middle East, and everywhere else. So again, we focus on building line management capability. We've done that now with over 100,000 managers in more than 1,000 different organizations around the world. And if you follow us and are connected to us on LinkedIn, then you'll see that we're constantly on the move, learning, sharing, and helping to develop, I guess, some of the core competencies that we all know as managers are really key. The reason why we wanted to do these live streams was it gives us and it gives me an opportunity to share with you what we're finding on our journey. As you would imagine, when you start to see 100,000 or more managers in action, you start to see patterns. If we hadn't have started to see patterns by this point, I'd be concerned, but there are a tremendous number of patterns at play. And what we're constantly doing is learning from what we're seeing. And the way to do this, as far as we're concerned, is to bring this to life through these live streams. So it gives us a really rich way to bring together, in a way, our insights, the best practices, and some of the things that we see that work. Now, we're all really time poor. No one's got any time. Our attention spans are often shot to death. So what we like to try and do as much as possible during this sort of half an hour or so is to share with you some super practical things, share with you some data, some research. We've got what I would call like nice clean data. And this is the research that we've got from our program. Of the 100,000 managers who've been through the program, we've got data on about 15,500 managers. So this is good, clean, refined data. On the other side, we've got some dirty data, some filthy data. And it's the sort of data that we poll on LinkedIn, right? So again, if you're into your statistics, I'm sure there's all sorts of issues with it, but it does give us an interesting read of what the public think on a whole range of topics. So again, if you're connected to us on LinkedIn, you'll often see that there are lots of polls that we poll on a regular basis. So again, thank you so much for interacting with those, and we'll share some of that insight as we get into this session. Now, as we go through, we've got one of my colleagues, Ashley, who's also live on the line. So any questions you've got, please put them through to us. If you want to put those through as a private DM, we'll endeavor as much as we can to answer those after. But if you've got anything that you're happy to share, please put it through. And as we get towards the back end of the session, Ashley will share some of those questions, comments, thoughts, again, with the wider open group. One of the things that we find often is we've all got some quite deep and quite personal challenges. So again, it doesn't need to be explicit. If you want to do that in direct message, please feel free to do so. Now, lots to get through. This topic, as we talked about, as we call it, the performance review, or actually reviewing the performance review, came again from looking at a LinkedIn poll of the number of people who believe that we should be reviewing the performance review. Sounds like a riddle, but it's not. And we're going to get into this stat in a minute. But as always, let's roll the intro. How do we review the performance review? So as we often say, as the weeks get bigger, the attendees get bigger, the registrations get bigger, the intros get bigger. So again, over 100,000 managers have now been through our program. If you've just joined the live stream, welcome very much to this session. Thank you for being here. Multi-platform live stream on LinkedIn, on very many other platforms and streams as well. And this is focused very much so on how do we review the performance review. Now, you may be listening to this from the perspective of you might be a CEO or a HR director or someone really senior in an organization. And your challenge is how do we really think about this for the whole organization? So we're going to get into some of that. You may be thinking about this from the perspective of you are a manager. Our focus and our bias is very much on the role of the manager. And how do we help managers in terms of building their capability? Often what we're doing, really, I think, in many of the organizations we've seen and from personal experience, is we're not equipping managers well enough to deal with some of these challenges. And in some cases, we're kind of like really messing up managers in a way, because we're in a way, the lack of preparation for some of these challenges can result in some really difficult things for managers. So we're going to look at this from that. So this may be, you're thinking about this from the perspective that you've got a team of people and you're thinking, how do I address some of these personal, interpersonal review challenges that you may have on a regular basis? It may be that you're yet to become a manager, that you've got in your mind, you want to become a manager, you want to become a people leader. Why? I don't know why you do it. It's an insane thing to do. Human beings are so irrational. But if you are still hell-bent on becoming a people manager, then hopefully this is going to be of value to you as well. And hopefully this will help you to avoid many of the pitfalls that organizations and managers often fall into with this. So the reason why we are so laser focused on this area of looking at performance reviews is if you are sort of involved or have been involved with our World Class Manager program, you'll know that there are about 27 modules now that make up our program. It began with 12. All the way in New Zealand, we sort of started the research all the way through to Vancouver, I guess, as far west in Canada, interviewing CEOs, HR directors, frontline managers, and saying, what do you need from what you would consider to be a world-class manager? We've taken all that global insight, long story very short, and built out now 27 core modules that constitute the World-Class Manager program. We were going back through in preparation for today with the team, thinking about how many of these modules or how many of these key disciplines of a great manager or a world-class manager relate to the important challenge of the performance review. And actually it's close to 25%. And it's close to 25% for a reason that I just mentioned, because I think as organizations, what we often do is we put managers into a very difficult position, into having to have some quite tough, challenging, abrasive conversations about performance, about growth, and we're not preparing them for those challenges. So I wanted to give you a very, very quick overview, because we try and keep this nice and short and sweet. There are 6 modules of our program that we focus on that deal with this performance review, performance management, performance conversation issue. The first thing that we look at is what we call great goal setting. And again, this is all available on our website. So if you want to read more about this, please feel free to do so. In great goal setting, we're looking at the discipline and skill of the manager at being able to essentially set great goals. Sounds quite easy to do. As we often know, it's quite hard. The reason why it's quite hard is because there is a fundamental human question, which is, what do you want? And not many people can answer it. Of all of the CEOs we've worked with, there are lots and lots of very successful people that I've come across all around the world who don't actually know what they want. They fell into a career. We have a guy who ran a business for 40 years. He employs more than 15,000 people, and they're listed on the stock exchange. And he said to me, his dad expected him to go into that line of work when he left university, took over a family business. And he spent the last 40 years doing that job and sort of realized he doesn't actually want to do that job. And I said, wow, it took you 40 years to realize that? He said, well, no, it wasn't that. It was that I wasn't conscious of the fact that I was, in a way, my career was on autopilot. Answering a very simple but fundamental question is not necessarily that easy. And the question is, what do you want? Which is why we focus so much on great goal setting. The inspiring appraisal conversation element of this is you could have the best goal setting conversation in the world. It doesn't mean that you're going to leave feeling fired up and feeling inspired to do things. And that is really important, especially where we're facing the economic headwinds that we are now. And we are not always in sort of the position to pay people more. The resource isn't plentiful, in which case, if that is the case in your organization, or you could work for a charity or NGO where there truly is no money to spend on either more pay, bonuses, or on investment in training and development, how do we make sure that people genuinely still feel inspired and want to give of their best? And we'll come back to that because I think it's really important. The difficult conversation area is something for us that comes up time and time again with managers. Managers constantly talk about the need to deal with this sort of challenging area of how do I have a difficult conversation. It's quite a strange one, and maybe we can get into this in another live stream because I think this is quite a deep area. But I'll just give you two very contrasting different organizations, different in scale and size, but you'll understand what I mean when I explain in a way what they face and what they don't face probably. So two organizations, one employs around 12,000 people, one employs around 3,000 people. I'm going to try and be really nondescript here because to be fair to their anonymity. One organization that employs 12,000 people has an entire team of people employed full-time to deal with employee grievances, courtroom issues, employee relations problems. I mean, there's really some significant employee behavior issues in the organization, grievances raised constantly. The other organization, which of course is 4 times smaller than this 12,000 people organization, has pretty much about zero employee grievances raised on an annual basis, pretty much. They've got no courtroom cases. They've got no employee relations issues. Why is that the case? Well, the organization that employs around 3,000 people has a regular 12-weekly one-to-one review process where they get into some deep personal stuff. And therefore, what they do is the difficult conversations often don't arise. In the other organization, if you looked at their regular review process and you said, okay, how often do you get together and talk about these important, challenging adult-to-adult conversation issues? The answer is largely not really at all. And therefore, small things often bubble, and then they blow and they become a grievance or an issue. So it's a fascinating thing looking at these two organizations in a way, and they're both very pressurized in the work that they do and in the sectors that they're in. One organization has no issue with this. The other one has an entirely sort of, it's an industry. It employs a whole bunch of people. The fourth thing that we look at is we look at the skill of the manager or the desire and the ability and having the time to truly develop oneself, which has a huge impact on this overall performance review issue. Number 5 that we look at is what we call the feedback skills and the feedback skill ability of the individual. It's a fascinating thing, isn't it? Because often I think, sorry, there's some sirens in the background. This is Central London. What we often look at is we believe that the manager gets promoted and then there somehow descends like the feedback skills fairy, just sort of wafts in and waves the magic wand. And then, I have this realization. I'm at one with the universe. I understand all that is and all that there is to be. And I've also got these feedback skills now. It's insane, absolutely insane when we think about this. Often what we don't do is prepare managers in order to have a really good sort of goal-setting, feedback-based conversation where you are often giving people very challenging feedback. So it's another big area. And then the 6th one that we look at as part of our 27-module program is looking at what we call sort of coaching the team. And how do you develop, in a way, a coaching skill? Not in the idea that everyone's going to become qualified, trained coaches. It's not that. But it's more about how do we ensure that managers in a way have the basics of what's needed in order to really understand how to get the best out of someone else. So as I said, I'd come back to some clean data and some dirty, rotten, filthy data in terms of statistically, probably anomalies all over it. But anyway, I think it's interesting because it's us, it's the public, it's LinkedIn. I asked a question about a week ago, just less than a week ago, 6 days ago. And the question was, if you had 100 random people in your organization and asked them, what would they say about the performance reviews? So performance reviews, what would 100 random people in your organization say? 10% have responded to this and said that they would say they work well. 19% don't even have performance reviews. Now, that could be for a good reason, that you've decided that they're really not for you and they don't work. Or it could be that people actually do want them, but the culture's not evolved to the point where those are normalized. But 71% of managers or of people that we spoke to in the survey said that actually, yes, they do need reviewing. I think most people in most organizations in most countries around the world would agree with this statement and say that the performance reviews need reviewing. Now, of course, there are some inherent challenges when we think about this. It brings up all sorts of issues. We're challenging people's perceptions in terms of how good they might think they are versus what the organization might think. We often say to our kids, I've got 2 daughters, we often say to our kids, they're lousy singers. What we don't want them to do is turn up in front of Simon Cowell on X Factor and have Simon Cowell tell them they're lousy singers. We don't want them to exist in this false reality. You may argue this is pretty harsh, but I'm like, singing is not for you, kids. I mean, this is not where your future's going to be at. But the whole point is often there can be a big mismatch in the perception of what we think versus what others might think. Now, if you talk to car salesmen, if you talk to estate agents, if you talk to executive search firms, people often overvalue their property, they overvalue their car, they overvalue themselves. Well, not necessarily that they overvalue it, but they place a different value than maybe someone else sees. So there are all of these inherent sort of interpersonal, psychological challenges, philosophical challenges when we think about value and what that might mean, which gives us an idea of maybe why some of the issues do come up. But we like to look at the simple things here, the things that we can control. And the big question that we like to ask around this is why? Why would you even, if you started the organization from scratch, let's imagine you've got 10,000 people in your company and you say, you know what? This is day one. We've got 10,000 people. We've got, I don't know, someone's given us $1 billion of capital. We're well capitalized. We've got 10,000 brilliant people. If you were to design a performance review process from scratch, the question I guess we often ask CEOs is, would it be the same as how it currently works? Now, again, many people, if I look back at that survey, maybe 10% would say absolutely yes, it's perfect, it works really well. And if you are in the 10%, then I would love it if you could share how you've done it and what you do, maybe openly in the chat. It'd be great for others to learn from. For the other people, for the 71% who said that they do need reviewing, often there is this sense that, you know, maybe this isn't working so well. So again, the fundamental question is, why would you even want to have a performance review? So again, this could be a very useful question to ask in your exec team, in your SLT, in your exco, in your excom, whoever the most senior group of people in the organization is. And we'll come back at the end. There are 3 specific things that I would love to give you as guidance based on everything that we've seen. And I think it will help to inform those conversations as well. The second thing that I look at here in terms of, in a way, why would we want to have the performance reviews in place is ultimately, if you're thinking about this from the perspective of the CEO or the most senior group of people in the organization, actually, it's not even necessarily just true for the CEO. This is kind of true for everyone, I think. You probably want to align people. The ultimate here is that we get people on the same page. And I think that this is one of the most fundamental reasons of why you want a performance review process in place, right? And there's two important parts to this. One is that we want people on the same page. One of the hardest things to do in any organization, if you think about how we're bombarded with messaging, content, social media messaging, all of the things that take our attention and our time away, it's really hard to get people to get onto the same page and agree. There's a guy called Colonel Ed Guthrie, and I referenced him maybe 4 or 5 live streams ago. Colonel Ed Guthrie was from the US military, and he has this, what he calls the after action review process. So many of us may be familiar with after action reviews. It came originally from some of the work the US military was doing, and it essentially works around 4 key questions. And I think that they're absolutely brilliant questions, and we can apply these to reviewing performance reviews. The first question was, what was supposed to happen? Second question, what actually happened? Third question, why was there a difference in between 1 and 2, good or bad? And then the fourth question is, what can we do differently next time? First question, what was supposed to happen? Second question, what actually happened? Third question, why was there a difference in between those first 2? And then the last question, what can we do differently next time? He says, and he gave this speech publicly, he says the hardest thing to agree on, the hardest question to agree on is what was supposed to happen. Often we don't agree on what the original goal was. So let's assume that we actually do understand at the organizational level, across the organization, through the organization, what the primary purpose, what the function, what the goal, what the vision, what the mission is, whatever the thing it is that you would want everyone to understand. Let's assume that we do know that. The point of the performance review, of course, is to ensure that we are all aligned to that. And it means that on a regular basis, we can go back to this North Star, this golden thread, this red thread. Shout out to Freddie Gilmar, who may be on the call, who runs the Red Thread organization. But it's something that we want people to have a universal connection with, as something like why we exist. Not to get too esoteric, but this is truly about, from a commercial point of view anyway, you would probably want alignment to happen in the organization. Let's now assume that the performance reviews are happening on a regular basis, and the performance reviews start with people talking about why we're here, what the function is. I worked for a guy, actually I will name him because he was exceptional as a leader, I think. His name was Jeremy Newman, and he was the managing partner of BDO when I worked there many years ago. I worked there between 2005, 2007, and I had the pleasure and the opportunity, I would genuinely say that, to work with him as my ultimate boss at the time. And I learned so much. what I recognized that he did is every single meeting I saw him go to, he talked about the fundamental sort of purpose of the organization. And he talked about why the firm is there, what it's there to do. And to the point where, I left BDO in 2007. This is now 2024, a while ago. And I still remember the sort of three statements that they used to talk about when it came to defining that. So every major sort of leadership team interaction began with this reclarification of what the purpose was. So ultimate alignment. And then what you would want to happen is every 3 to 6 months through the performance review process is that you would start that as a manager with saying, right, this is what we're here to do. Now let's think about what we need to do over the next 3 to 6 months and make sure that this aligns with what we're here to try and achieve, right? Sounds so unbelievably simple, so unbelievably difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is because often managers, I'm the frontline manager, team supervisor, shift leader, and you're putting me in a very difficult position because often I don't understand what this goal is. Again, in the previous live stream, we talked about the percentage of managers who actually understand the organization's goal. I haven't got the stat with me today, but I think it was around 42%. And this is based on 15,500 managers that we've looked at and analyzed the data on. So we know that we've often got this low number of people who do understand what this is all about. And now I'm expected magically to sit there in a one-to-one and somehow align this individual's performance and goal setting and development plan and activity plan with something that I don't even realize exists in some cases. And even if I do, it's probably a little bit sketchy in terms of what I understand. So that's when we talk about alignment is a huge aspect of this. And I think that there are two very simple ones. I'm sure there's a million more that we can all come up with, but with the purpose of, we want to keep this nice and short and sweet this morning in terms of the live stream, two key things we wanted to look at. One is looking at what I would call alignment. The second big one, and we'll follow this up with some data in a moment, which I think you'll find quite compelling, is, and I think this is the more ethereal one, this is the harder one to get hold of, is yes, we want it to align people, but ultimately we want this to fire people up. I had lunch with a close friend of mine a couple of days ago. I won't say who he is because it'll expose his organization, but it was a fascinating conversation because they're an investment firm, right? The investors want to grow the business at a faster rate than it's currently growing, and they make a number of investments every single year. What they're looking at, if you look at the investment cycle of what they would talk about creating alpha, so essentially creating real value in their companies that they own, and how do they get there? They've cost rationalized as much as possible. They've tweaked and pulled all the levers that you would traditionally pull in terms of making those businesses higher performing. The thing that you're often left with, and we found this working with investors all around the world, is you're often left with then how do you, from a people and culture point of view, fire people up so that they're prepared in a way to go the extra mile, to work harder, to do more, to sell more, to make more of an impact. Whatever the outcome for the organization is that thing, that ethereal thing is very difficult to achieve. But ultimately, how do we fire people up across the organization? So when we think about this purpose of the performance review, yes, we want alignment. That's key. Of course, we need that. We also need it to make sure, and this is where the skill and the value of the manager really kicks in, is how do we help people to really then get fired up about what this thing is all about? Because you could be the most aligned organization in the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to go the extra mile. And that's all of those elements and many more that I talked about at the beginning. Now, this is what I think is a shocking headline, right? It's a shocking headline, I think, based on our data. And this was looking at the percentage of managers. And of course, we're biased. Our focus is looking at the manager here. This is the percentage of managers who actually have a clear career plan, right? A clear sort of development plan in the organization. On the 15,500 managers that we've been able to get some good, clean data on, actually, we found it's a shocking number. It's 28.8%. 28.8% of managers have got a clear plan of action for how they take their career forward. So I don't know about you, but place yourselves in the shoes of the CEO. You've gone there to your annual conference. Let's assume you've got this 10,000 people. You're a big organization. You've got 10,000 people in the organization, and you're going to talk to all of them. Let's assume 1,000 of those 10,000 are managers. And we now know that around 288 of those have got a clear career plan. Now, you think you've done a great job as a CEO because you shared the vision, the mission, the strategy. You went away for a few days with your leadership team and you got together and you all emerged after a few days high-fiving each other and sort of chest bumping and saying, we've nailed this. We are super fired up in terms of our career plan and our growth and where we're taking this organization, then what you do is you go and share it with the masses, either through video or you do, staff engagement exercises, whatever you do. Even after all of that is said and done, we find that around 28.8% of managers actually have a clear career plan. Now, for all sorts of reasons of why this is the case, I think, based on everything we've seen, is that often their interaction, even as the frontline manager, with their line managers, who, let's say these are the senior managers, the directors, the executives of the organization, is often as lousy in many cases as the frontline employees' interaction with those frontline managers. And not lousy because people are setting out to be lousy. It's not like they go to their performance reviews for this quarter and say, I'm going to hope to achieve supreme lousiness this quarter. This is never the case, but it's more the case that people aren't often given guidance about what great looks like. Now, my thinking is, based on, again, everything that we've seen, is that all of the answers here, everything that we need to know to solve this, is probably already locked up in the heads of people in your organization. So, as always with these live streams, my main focus, the thing that we want to get across as much as possible, is the how-tos. How do we get into the stuff? So what, Wayne? Really interesting. How do I deal with some of this? So I wanted to present to you, share with you 3 things that we think are quite useful to think about in terms of how to start to relook at this, how to review the performance review. Right. First thing is, in terms of what I would say is the 10% will help you to solve it. What I mean here is based on everything that we've seen, right, all the organizations we go into. I've been at this, I'm 48 years old. My hair's cut short, but it's a bit grey. 48 years old, been involved in working in employee engagement, developing managers, all sorts of stuff to do with culture for numbers of years, maybe 20 odd years, 25 years, right? Of all of the organizations that we've gone into, I would argue, and again, this is a very big generalization, but it helps, I think, to present this as a model, is that around 10% of most populations disproportionately care about forwarding the organization to some degree. So again, what I mean is you've probably got around 10% of any population who you could engage with a little bit more, who've had some really good thoughts. They've thought this thing through. They've reviewed it. They've done it independently, whether you've asked them to or not. The challenge is often we don't know who those people are. Often we think that they are the change champions or the people that will be nominated by other senior people. But I think this is often, again, a lousy way to find those people. What we do need to do is find a way to get those people to want to step forward, to engage with us. So again, you may be the most senior person in the organization or be able to influence other senior people in the organization. If this is the case, we would argue it would be a smart idea to start to ask people to step forward. And those people who might want to contribute towards rethinking this whole performance review. It could be that you've employed external consultants and advisors who said to you categorically, this is the right way that you need to do it. And it may have worked for a period of time. That may have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. And this is what we recognize in some organizations. Maybe there's a need to refresh this whole thing. And I don't think trying to solve this by bringing the outside in is necessarily the right way to do it. Often, even in a population of 100 people, you're going to have a few people who've really thought this through and could contribute in a valuable way to restructuring this whole thing. So I think identifying a population of people in your organization, and you may be mega big, you may be 100,000 people in the organization. I think we've got some people in here signed in, as far as I can see in the registrations, from an organization that's got like 250,000 people. So in that case, you've probably got between 25 to 40,000 managers on average. Too big. But there is, again, a subset of any population, and you could identify them quite easily and get them to step forward, who could make a contribution to thinking about how do we refresh and review this whole thing. Second thing here, which may be, again, a bit controversial, maybe a bit of a challenge, I don't know, in terms of the culture of the organization, is I would certainly involve the customer. If you were to rethink this whole thing, if you were to review how this whole thing works, why wouldn't you want to involve the customer or the ultimate beneficiary? So it could be that you're a bank or you're a law firm or a professional services firm and you're ultimately serving clients. It could be that you're a hotelier and ultimately you're serving customers. It could be that you're a manufacturing business serving other supply chain partners. It could be that you're an NHS trust. If you're outside the UK, this is a National Health Service. This is our hospitals. It could be that you're a hospital serving and ensuring the provision of patient care is excellent for the local community. It could be that you're a housing association, right? It's regardless. It could be that you're a public sector organization or a department. And again, of course, your focus is public service. regardless of what the organization does, we all serve someone. There's always ultimately a key stakeholder, and there usually is someone who benefits, hopefully, from whatever the organization does. And I think involving the customer, the beneficiary, stakeholders, key stakeholders, in what the performance review might need to look like could be a really clever way to do it. We've seen a few organizations do this, and I think this is a really powerful mechanism to use because it's evidence-based, it's market tested, and in a way it can confront you as an organization, because often what you believe is things are a certain way, and then you find out actually they're a whole nother way. So I think involving the customer or the beneficiary or the person who ultimately gets the impact of the organization, hopefully in a good way, is a great person to involve. And the final one is then asking a really important question, is ultimately, does this drive impact? Again, go all the way back up to the top of this, when we were sort of asking the question, what's the job of the performance review? Ultimately, this is designed to fire up the organization and align the organization so that ultimately for many organizations, it means that you grow. And if it doesn't have the right desired impact on growth, then maybe the performance review needs reviewing. Not maybe, definitely the performance review needs reviewing. And again, this can be confrontational because often we think that what we've got in place works pretty well. When I say pretty well, I would wonder, maybe you can even rerun the same survey question of asking your people internally, how many of them believe that the performance review needs reviewing? And let's see how that matches up with our public dirty, filthy data on 71% of people said, yes, it does need reviewing. I'd be fascinated to know what that actually looks like in your organization. So again, when we come back to this topic of how do we review the performance review, I guess there's a few key questions to ask. Should we review it? I absolutely categorically say, yes, we should review it, even if you think it's perfect and it's working perfectly. On a regular basis, there is a value in reinvestigating how you do what you do. How do you then do that? I think identifying a population or percentage of the population who disproportionately care about your growth, your development, your future as an organization is really important. Then the key is, of course, once you've figured out, now, this is how we should review it. This is what we think we might need to do in terms of the as is to be situation. If we've now figured out what this is now going to be going forward, then it faces us with probably the biggest challenge of all, which is how do we equip and prepare our frontline managers, team leaders, shift supervisors, and actually everyone to understand the role that they play in having a great one-to-one or a great performance review. And again, in terms of the frequency, based on everything that we've seen, I would argue that a quarterly frequency would probably make the most sense based on everything that we've seen. If you think about the stock market listed companies report their earnings quarterly. Analysts beat up stock market listed companies quarterly. They review them quarterly for a reason. A 90-day cycle is quite a nice amount of time for most people to sort of see. I kind of get 90 days. And speaking about performance reviews, if you're outside the UK, we've got our massive national performance review tomorrow, where we'll select our new party and prime minister. So again, that's the ultimate, of course, isn't it? We're reviewing who we think should run this organization, run the country. So again, hopefully this has given you some food for thought. If there are some questions come in, please do pop them through. And I'm sure Ashley is here live on the line, is going to share some of these questions with us. Again, if you want to share some of these with us privately, please feel free to do so in the DMs, and we will endeavor to do that. I should say, actually, my day job, I'm not a live streamer. I run a business and I'm very busy like everyone else. So I like to try and take as much time as I can to do this. So we'll try and get back to everyone in terms of the feedback questions, but we'll see what we can do. So Ashley, it seems there is a question coming in. So I get to see this the same time as you do. And I think that there's like a 15-second delay between platforms. So Rupert Patel, great to see Rupert Patel. Really interested to know more about any good talent management tools companies use to help with performance reviews. Actually, yeah, there are quite a few. Maybe what I can do, I do know Rupert, so I'll share with you some of those on email. I mean, I think ultimately, in terms of if I could give you a broad brush, and there are some great ones out there, I think the key here is to find something that works for the manager in terms of the time. So we've seen a few interesting tools. One is being used in a big broadcaster we work with, and that's dramatically shaved off the amount of time that they spend in interacting with the technology in the platform. Again, because it's being sympathetic to the role of the manager. Often what we've got are quite archaic systems and time-consuming systems, which most managers don't want to do. We met someone recently who's got 21 direct reports. They don't have the ability, budget-wise, to be able to bring in other sub-managers and team leaders. And this lady told me, she is running 21 reviews every 6 months with the team. I mean, it's phenomenal, and showed me the forms that they have to go through. That alone burns hours and hours of time. So again, I think there's a fundamental principle at play, but I'll share with you, Rupa, some of the stuff that we found on this. Thank you very, very much. Sorin, performance review should be periodical, Q1, 2, 3, 4, and not yearly. Absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think we found in many organizations, and as I may have mentioned at the beginning, I'm not sure if you missed it, but there were sort of two organizations I set out. One was 3,000 people, one was 12,000 people. And if you looked at the 12,000 people organization, they were having a review, if you could even call it a review, every 12 months. I think it's so difficult to do that. And one important point, actually, I forgot to make this point. I think this is really key. Again, if you're certainly newer in your career, and we have many interactions with undergrads, I think my first ever manager when I joined Arthur Andersen, or now Deloitte as it was exceptional. And what he said to me was every time anything positive happens, like it could be you've done something on a project where you get some good feedback from someone more senior or from a colleague. And he told me to create like a little folder. And it sounds so simple, but put everything positive in those folders. Now, at the time, and this is going back to the late 90s, we were having these formal reviews once a year. And I don't know about you, but I don't know what I did this time last week, let alone this time 4 months ago, let alone this time last year. So we often forget so much, and that's damaging, because often what we're trying to do in these performance reviews is demonstrate evidence for the things that we've done. And of course, the evidence is needed if we're going to try and vie for, promotion, development opportunities, pay rises, bonuses. All those things are really important. So I think that was great advice early on from a manager of keep what he called actually the glory file of how we should sort of refer and file some of this positive stuff. So again, a huge thank you to everyone who's connected into the live stream this week. Got an awesome turnout, awesome registration. Our focus and goal is to do this on a regular basis. So as we sort of move forward, we'll keep testing in terms of what the feedback is and what we should be covering. And before we go, there is another question. This is awesome. Another question coming in. So from Alex, from my experience, performance reviews should be driven by knowing the employee's strengths and weaknesses. Mainly development plans should be laid down by the reviewees themselves. As a reviewer, you make sure it's smart. Thoughts? 100% agree, Alex. An inherent challenge here is the first part, or the end part of your first line here, which is knowing the employees. I think there are many people, and if you think about people in your team, and we had this quite simple questionnaire a while ago, and we were asking managers, you like the dog's name of the people in your team, in your immediate team? Do you know their birthdays? Do you know sort of significant things about them? How much do you actually understand about these individuals? And I asked the question because we have an exercise, I'll share it with you really brief, what we ask people to do, and it takes about 90 minutes to 2 hours to do it. As we ask people in pairs, unbelievably simple, doesn't cost a penny to do it, is we ask each individual to share with the other individual their life story. And this could be a really valuable exercise if you've got members of the team that you don't know that well. What we ask them to do is to share their life story for about half an hour. Sounds a bit painful, and for the other party just to listen. And then what they do is they then reflect back on things that they've heard. And some amazing things happen when you do this. One, and I did this during lockdown with some random strangers, actually. Another story for another day. The fascinating thing is, as people are sharing with you their life story, they're having their own realizations. And then, of course, as a line manager, you're starting to get a much deeper and richer insight into why they do the things that they do, why they think the things that they think, maybe what impact their formative years and their parents' relationships had with them as sort of early on in life. It gives you such a different and rich picture around the individual. And I don't think many people go to sort of a deep degree of relationship building when it comes to understanding and knowing their employees. I think, to answer, a long answer to your question, Alex, but I think if we can get a deeper, richer understanding of the individual, I think it makes these conversations so much easier because the relationship is strong. And as often people say, right, great relationships can survive a ton of stress. Bad relationships break really, really easily. So yeah, thank you very much. So another question from Jonathan: from an admin perspective for the HR team, but also for managers, what would you say is an achievable time frame to complete each quarterly conversation? I hate the thoughts of managers being subject to the mental load associated with these conversations any more than is necessary. I totally agree. And, once you get that depth of interaction and the relationship is right with the individual, and maybe I would challenge managers to do this as a simple exercise. We cover this in module 1 of our program, actually, which is called Being a 21st Century Manager. We ask people to take a piece of paper, I won't do it. It's like super simple piece of paper, put yourself in the middle, put all of the key people in your team and key relationships that you would have a one-to-one or a performance review with. And then what we want you to do is take a red and a green pen and draw a red line to the relationships that you feel need some work and a green one to the relationships that you think work pretty well. Only you can be the judge, and you know in your heart of hearts when you think about that individual, you know, Mary, yeah, get on really well with Mary, understand Mary, have good conversations. Kate, a bit difficult with Kate. So, you know, we understand that this could be the case. When the relationship gets stronger, we often know that the regular interaction can be lessened because you just get each other. And it could be a 5-10 minute check-in. And what you don't want to do, to your point, is we definitely don't want to have this to be a laborious process, which is why we need to make this as easy as possible. There's an organization we work with, and what they ask their managers to do every quarter, really simple, and I absolutely love this, is they ask them to ask 2 very simple questions. And the 2 questions are, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And they said to me, they're going to share with me the questions they ask. And then I said at the end, what? Is that it? How are you feeling? How are you doing? Those are the 2 key questions. And what we found was, of course, the job of those 2 questions are to ensure that the individual leaves that one-to-one, and that could be 15, 20 minutes of a one-to-one, feeling cared for. So the emotion that they want people to leave the review with is feeling cared for. Why? Because they're in the business of delivering exceptional customer service. So again, when you pack this all the way back up to vision, purpose, why this is important, why is the performance review important in the delivery of your organization's fundamental purpose, only you know the answer to this, that it helps you then to redesign, I think, why the frequency should work in the way it does, and then what the content and the interaction should look like. In some organizations, you could be a regulatory or a regulated environment, in which case you need to have a real formality to the process, which we understand. And in many cases, it doesn't need to be that rigorous, and it can be made a lot easier for people too. Another question coming in. Awesome. From Gary Vickers. Thank you very much, Gary. Do you believe that performance reviews are a great opportunity to check employee alignment, identify skill shortages, and proactively address these? Yes, I do. Performance reviews should be positive, difficult conversations, yes, but positive outcomes, hopefully. Absolutely agree with you, Gary. I mean, yes, I do believe that the performance reviews are a great opportunity to check employees' alignment. And the reason why I think this is important is because there are very few organizations, if you think about it, and I don't know, you know, we're going to cause any arguments here. You may be the boss, but when we think about organizations or organizational leadership teams, there are very few of them who get together on a regular basis. So they are also quite infrequent in how they meet. Now, why is this a problem? Well, because often what happens is, in the absence of engagement and communication, what happens for most human beings fill information voids with what? Not often with fact. We fill them with myth, we fill them with story, and those are stories based on our own map and view and sort of philosophy of how we see the world. And often what can happen is that they become tremendously misaligned. Organizations and organizational leadership teams that meet on a regular basis, surprise, surprise, tend to enjoy better performance. So the organization I talked about earlier, who asks these 2 questions on a quarterly basis, what they do on a weekly basis is the entire global leadership team gets together, of course, virtually, every single Monday, and they talk about the challenges for the next week and what happened in the last week. I mean, there are very few organizations, and these guys employ 3,500 people in 7 different countries. There are very few organizations who have that level of interaction on a regular basis. And I think, again, this is something that we can see as value for why we should do this more often, even on a quarterly basis with the team, even just from the perspective of recognizing that things change. I've been through stuff in the last 3 months. I feel like I'm a different person in July than I was in April. Not that different, not like Jekyll and Hyde, but you know what I mean? We all go through experiences. We go through tough things at work, tough things at home, and therefore the need to recheck reality, I think, is really key. Another question. This is awesome. From Johnny. Thank you very much, Johnny. Is a system or tool necessary? Good question. Should it not be about the quality and frequency of the conversation based on the coaching skills of the manager? Definitely. Technically, the employee could go into a review with a page. I feel it stops it becoming perceived as a tick box exercise. Absolutely agree with you. And again, horses for courses. For some people, certain things work really well. For others, they don't. It depends, again, in terms of the ability of the manager. So again, we went to, I'll try and keep them nondescript. They were a call center business. And I was asked by the guy who runs the company to go and sit in some of the different manager discussion sessions. So I sat in this session, and there was this lady who sat at the end of the room, And she looked very despondent from the sort of second I walked in. I hoped it wasn't personal about me, but she looked like she couldn't be bothered with anything. And then as the group were discussing things and issues to do with the workplace, employee feedback, she still looked very despondent. And I said to her, because I just had to ask, and all that was going through my mind, Johnny, was like, how the hell did you become a manager here, right? But I can't ask that because I'm going to get kicked out. So I said at the end, I said, just out of interest, how did you become a manager? And she said, well, I was temping, and then they asked me if I wanted to go perm, and I thought, yeah, I might as well. So I went perm, and I said, oh wow! And how did that happen? Like, what was the timescale involved? Well, she said, oh, well, they asked me to go perm on the Friday, and then as of Monday, I went perm. And I thought, wow! And then afterwards, I spoke to her manager and said, what's the deal? And he, I didn't talk about her, but he said, we've got some really low energy managers in the team, and you're just thinking, I don't know about you, Johnny, but I would look at this situation and say, if having someone fired up in order to motivate and fire up the people is an important element of being a manager here, why would you want to put that person? And maybe they're just having a bad day. Let's be inclusive about all of this. I don't think so. So again, when we look at, who are we choosing? It's a broader question, right? Who do we choose for the role of the manager? If we've got two candidates here for the role of the manager, and we suspect one has a genuine desire to want to develop other human beings and help them to be better, and also has a desire to help them perform and align for what the organization is designed to do, it should be that person all day, every day. But is that a decision-making process used when deciding who should become a manager? Often in many organizations, no is the case. This, again, true story. We found a guy who said to me once, it's a terrible story, I think, but he said to me once that we promoted someone to manager because they were a solid drinker, and that was his decision-making process. So again, we're hoping a lot here. If this solid drinker has now got these amazing skills given by the performance review fairy to be able to have these sort of one-to-ones. Another question coming in. Let's do it. We're going. So Antonia Fowle, thank you very much. So what are your thoughts about performance ratings and a direct link from those to bonuses, promotion, prospects, etc.? Oh, this is good. It's contentious. So what are your thoughts about performance ratings and a direct link? I think it's very, very, very difficult, and you never get it right. We've not come across an organization on the planet who gets this right. The reason why it's kind of impossible to get right universally is because we've all got very, very different views about what things should look like. And each one of those views is correct because it's 100% subjective. So in terms of, how the performance ratings are then linked to the bonus, I think this is very difficult. We can make it less difficult if we do some really clever thinking about what might be in those performance ratings and how we describe those to people. So I'll give you a good example. I worked for a company once, and I had a guy on my team. He may also be on the line. I don't know, James, if you're there. But I thought this was an interesting thing that we sort of used to go back and forth about. And I remember in our performance rating, there's rating 1 to 5, 5 being obviously really good and 1 being not so good. And then what I'd have to say on the rating of leadership, right? I would have to give him a rating based on leadership. But the problem was there was no more information. It just said leadership. So he would say to me, when I did this and this and this, I thought that was leadership. And I'd say, I don't think that was leadership. And he'd say, I think that was leadership. And I'd say, I don't think that was leadership. But the problem was, right, I had to then take this rating into the more senior meeting and then justify why I thought this guy should have a 4 or maybe a 5. And I knew, of course, as a manager, if I can get him a 4 or a 5, and I really like the guy, if I can get him a 4 or a 5, he gets his bonus, and I want him to get his bonus. He's trying to buy a property with his wife. He gets a promotion potentially as well. So, but it was so airy-fairy of what actually was leadership. And then what it did is it caused a tremendous amount of difficult conversations, because now it's not the organization based on evidence suggesting that you've performed or underperformed. It's based on what Wayne says, because I'm the judge and jury when it comes to this, because I'm given zero help when it comes to deciding and having a criteria, which is why I think it sort of gets into this challenge. Again, which is why I came to the 3 points I made at the end, focused on let's involve a group of people who care about the organization, who can make an impact here, who want to redesign how this works. And why not look at either the external beneficiary customer who the organization serves, or maybe there's someone internal, if we're serving internal teams, that we could look at. So we're going to call it a day there, because we've been going 50 minutes and this is absolutely awesome. And the last question from Alex Fenner. I know Alex Fenner, great session. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you very much, Alex. And of course, Rose and Ash behind the scenes. They are behind the scenes working very hard. I have my team's mid-year check-in coming up, and this is helping me plan. I'm lucky that I have time to think properly and support them to grow. Well, you obviously work for a very good organization, and they obviously are very lucky that they've got Alex Fenner as their manager. What a great way to end the show. So live stream every 2 weeks. Next one is in 2 weeks' time. We keep them very loose. We don't even know what the next topic is, but as soon as we know, probably in the next day, then we'll push this out again on LinkedIn and on various mechanisms, emails, and also on various social platforms. Thank you so much for engaging with us. Absolutely brilliant in terms of some of the questions, really excellent. And I'm sure this gives you an insight, if you're new to this or you're trying to solve this, of maybe what some of the key themes are. And I think the value, as much as I've shared what I've shared, I think is often in what other peers think on this area as well. So a huge thank you very much to everyone who's involved, engaged, been involved in the process of setting things up. Huge thank you to the team as well. And we look forward to seeing you on the next live stream in 2 weeks' time. See you soon.